The ringing of my phone shattered the evening calm. "Elena, it's Marcus. I've had an accident. Come to the hospital now." His voice was a mix of pain and panic, but all I could think of was the irony. Just a month ago, I was the one in a hospital bed, alone and neglected. I'm Elena Carter, 32, a graphic designer, married to Marcus for 4 years. Our marriage, once a dream, had wilted under the weight of his immaturity and my growing disillusionment. "Might be serious, Elena. Are you listening?" Marcus's voice crackled through the phone, snapping me back to the present. "Yes, I heard you," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the urgency he expected. "But Marcus, remember when I was in the hospital? You never showed up, not even once." There was a pause, a silence that spoke volumes. "That's different, Elena. I'm your husband. And I was your wife, lying there wondering if my broken leg mattered to you at all." The memories flooded back, the loneliness, the pain, and his glaring absence. I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Just get here, Elena. We'll talk about this later." "No, Marcus. We're talking about it now. Or rather, I am, and you're finally listening. Remember how you left me alone, managing everything myself? Now it's your turn to see what that feels like." "Elena, don't do this. I need you." His plea was a jarring contrast to his usual dismissive tone. It was almost satisfying to hear that note of desperation. "I needed you too, Marcus. When I was lying in that hospital bed, scared and alone, I needed you. But where were you? Out with friends? Buried in work?" There was a silence again, but this time it was charged with his unspoken guilt. "Elena, please," he finally said, his voice softer, almost broken. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger and a twisted sense of victory. "I'll see to your admission process, Marcus, but that's where my obligation ends. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Goodbye, Marcus." I ended the call, my heart pounding with a mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for leaving him alone, but another, stronger part felt justified. This was his karma, his turn to understand the pain of abandonment. The evening sun cast long shadows across my living room as I sat there, contemplating my next move. Our marriage, once filled with dreams of a future together, had crumbled to this, a series of letdowns, disappointments, and now a cold, calculated revenge. Marcus's accident wasn't life-threatening, I knew that much, but it was serious enough to make him realize the gravity of his neglect. As I thought about the days ahead, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end for us. I had always imagined a life full of love and partnership, not this twisted game of tit for tat. But here I was, forced into a corner by his continuous neglect, playing a role I never wanted. The evening grew darker, and the silence in the apartment was deafening. I knew I had made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever. But at that moment, all I could think of was the loneliness of that hospital room, and how Marcus would now know exactly how that felt. The next morning, I woke up to the gray light filtering through the blinds, reminding me of the dreary days in the hospital. I pushed myself out of bed, my thoughts inevitably drifting to Marcus, alone in the hospital. A part of me ached to go to him, but the memories of my own abandonment held me back. As I made my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Elena, why aren't you here? I need you." His words, once a source of comfort, now felt like thorns. I replied curtly, "I'm sure the nurses are taking good care of you." His response was quick. "It's not the same. You know I can't handle hospitals." That message struck a nerve. How many times had I wished for his presence during my own hospital stay? The nights were the hardest, the silence of the room amplifying my loneliness, and now he was getting a taste of his own medicine. I spent the day in a daze, my mind a battleground of emotions. By evening, I couldn't resist anymore and drove to the hospital. I needed to see him, to confront him, to show him what he had put me through. Walking through the sterile hospital corridors, I felt a sense of déjà vu. The smell of disinfectant, the hushed voices, it all took me back to my own time of pain and neglect. I found Marcus's room and stood outside the door, taking a deep breath. As I pushed the door open, the sight of him lying there, pale and vulnerable, almost broke my resolve. "Elena, you came," he said, his voice weak but filled with relief. "Yes, Marcus, I came to remind you of something." My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling. He looked confused. "Remind me?" "Do you remember how you left me alone in the hospital, Marcus? How you never once showed up to see if I was all right?" He averted his eyes, the guilt evident on his face. Elena, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't change the past, Marcus. It doesn't erase the nights I spent crying, wondering why I wasn't important enough for you. His eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of pain and realization. I never knew how much I hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, now you do. And now you get to experience what it feels like to be alone, to be neglected. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but it was overshadowed by my own pain, my own need for revenge. I'll come back tomorrow. Marcus, maybe by then you'll understand a bit more about what I went through. As I turned to leave, he called out, Elena, please. I didn't look back. I couldn't. This was his karma, his lesson to learn. The drive home was a blur, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I had stood up for myself, but at what cost? The house felt emptier than ever as I walked in. I sat on the couch, the silence enveloping me. I had hoped that seeing Marcus suffer would bring me some sense of satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. I had become the person I never wanted to be, driven by hurt and the desire for revenge. But in the process, I had lost a part of myself, a part that believed in forgiveness and understanding. That night, I lay awake, the shadows of the room mirroring the darkness in my heart. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The road to revenge was a lonely one, and I was just at the beginning. The days following my visit to the hospital were a haze of conflicting emotions. Each morning brought with it a reminder of the empty space beside me in bed, a space that used to be filled by Marcus. But it wasn't just his physical absence that weighed on me. It was the growing realization of how little he had cared for our shared life. One afternoon, as I was sorting through our bills and paperwork, I stumbled upon a bank statement that made my blood run cold. There, in black and white, were withdrawals and expenses I knew nothing about. Marcus had been siphoning money from our joint account for months. The betrayal stung sharply, adding fuel to the fire of my resentment. I called him, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. Marcus, what are these expenses on our bank statement? Where is all this money going? There was a pause on the other end before he responded, his voice laced with annoyance. Elena, now's not the time. I'm in the hospital, remember? That's no excuse to evade my question. You've been taking money from our account. For what, Marcus? He sighed, a sound that grated on my nerves. Fine. I've been having some financial issues. I didn't want to worry you. Lies, Marcus. You never worried about worrying me before. What are you hiding? He was silent for a moment, then said, It's nothing, Elena. Just some debts. I'll handle it. I felt a cold laugh escape my lips. Debts? You gamble away our future and call it some debts? You're unbelievable. Elena, don't be like this. I said I'll handle it. I hung up the phone, my heart racing with anger and frustration. This was more than just neglect. This was deceit. The revelation of Marcus's gambling was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just our relationship that was a sham. Our entire life together was built on lies and false promises. I began to wonder what else he had been hiding from me. As I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of Marcus's betrayal, a plan began to form in my mind. If Marcus thought he could gamble away our life together without consequence, he was sorely mistaken. I started by changing the passwords on our accounts, blocking his access to our finances. Then I called a few of his creditors, learning more about the extent of his debts. It was worse than I had imagined. Marcus had been digging himself into a financial hole for years, and I had been too blind to see it. With each new discovery, my resolve strengthened. I would not be a victim of Marcus's deceit any longer. I would take back control of my life, starting with our finances. The days passed in a flurry of activity as I untangled the web of our joint finances. I sold items that were no longer needed, cut unnecessary expenses, and started working on a budget that would allow me to regain financial stability. Marcus called several times, each call more desperate than the last. Elena, what are you doing? Why can't I access our accounts? We need to talk about this. But I was done talking. No, Marcus. We don't need to talk. You've done enough talking and not enough doing. I'm taking control of our finances. It's time you faced the consequences of your actions. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. For the first time in years, I was taking charge of my own destiny, no longer content to be a passive player in Marcus's reckless game. I lay in bed that night, the silence of the house a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. I had taken the first step towards independence, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. One thing was clear, though. I would no longer be the enabler of Marcus's destructive habits. It was time for him to face his own demons, just as I was facing mine. The morning air felt crisp as I stood on my balcony, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts about Marcus and his deceitful actions. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was nothing more than a stranger wearing a familiar face. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. My phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Marcus, I answered, bracing myself for his usual mix of excuses and pleas. "Elena, why have you locked me out of our accounts? This is madness," he exclaimed, his voice laced with frustration and anger. "Madness, Marcus? No, what's madness is how you've been gambling away our future. I'm protecting what's left of our finances." I replied, my voice firm and unwavering. "This is not your decision to make alone. We're married, Elena. You're overreacting." "Overreacting? You've been lying to me, hiding debts, and now you accuse me of overreacting? I won't let you drag me down with you." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he searched for a way to manipulate the situation. "Elena, please. I need your support now more than ever. I'm still in the hospital, remember?" His attempt to gain sympathy fell on deaf ears. "Your being in the hospital doesn't erase what you've done. It's time you face the consequences of your actions." I could sense his anger rising. "You're being unreasonable, Elena. When I get out of here, we'll need to have a serious talk." "A talk? That time has passed, Marcus. Actions speak louder than words, and your actions have shown me everything I need to know." I ended the call. A sense of satisfaction mixed with a pang of sadness. The man I had once loved was now the source of my deepest contempt. As the days passed, I poured my energy into rebuilding my life piece by piece. I updated my resume and started applying for jobs, determined to stand on my own 2 feet. The house, once a shared space filled with laughter and love, now felt like a prison of memories. I started planning to move out, to find a place that I could call my own. Marcus's texts and calls became more infrequent, each one more desperate than the last. "Elena, we need to talk. This can't be the end for us." But it was too late for talk. The bridge between us had been burned, and I had no intention of rebuilding it. The day of his discharge from the hospital arrived. I received a text from him. "Elena, I'm coming home. We need to sort this out." I replied with a single sentence, "There's nothing left to sort out, Marcus. I won't be there when you get home." I packed the last of my belongings, taking one last look at the home we had built together. It was time to leave the past behind and start anew. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I was no longer bound by Marcus's deceit and betrayal. I was free to chart my own course, to find my own happiness. The sun set behind me as I drove towards my new beginning, leaving the shadows of the past behind. Settling into my new apartment, a sense of peace enveloped me, a stark contrast to the turmoil of my former life with Marcus. This small space was my sanctuary, a place untainted by deceit and betrayal. I had just begun to unpack the last of my boxes when my phone rang. It was Marcus, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "Elena, what is this? I come home to an empty house? Where are you?" he demanded. "I've moved out, Marcus. I'm starting over away from your lies and your gambling," I responded, my voice steady and resolute. "This is absurd. You can't just leave me like this. What about our marriage vows?" "Vows? You broke those vows long ago, Marcus, when you chose gambling over our future." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his head, searching for the right words to regain control. "Elena, you're being too hasty. Let's talk about this. We can fix it," he pleaded. "Talk? Marcus, all you ever did was talk. Promises, excuses, lies. I'm done listening. It's time for action, and my first action was leaving you. You'll regret this, Elena. You need me." His words, once powerful enough to sway me, now fell flat. "No, Marcus, it's you who needs me, but you won't have me anymore. I'm taking back my life." I hung up the phone, cutting off any further attempts from him to manipulate the situation. I was done being a pawn in his game of deception. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as I threw myself into my new job and setting up my home. I relished the freedom of making my own decisions, of living a life free from Marcus's shadow. But the tranquility was short-lived. One evening, I received an email from a private investigator I had hired before leaving Marcus. The report contained photos and evidence of Marcus's infidelity, confirming my worst fears. He hadn't just gambled away our finances, he had been cheating on me for months. The revelation was a gut punch, a painful confirmation of how far our marriage had fallen. But it also fueled my resolve to cut all ties with Marcus. I couldn't let his actions dictate my future any longer. I called him one last time, the evidence from the investigator in front of me. "Marcus, I know about the affair. Don't bother denying it. I have proof." There was a moment of stunned silence before he responded, his voice a mixture of anger and guilt. "Elena, it's not what you think. She meant nothing. She meant enough for you to betray our marriage. It's over, Marcus. I'm filing for divorce." His pleas and excuses continued, but I was unmoved. The man I had once loved was a stranger to me now, his words meaningless. I hung up the phone, a sense of finality washing over me. The chapter of my life with Marcus was closing, and a new one was beginning. I was ready to face the future, unburdened by his betrayal. As I looked around my small apartment, I realized it wasn't just a new home. It was a symbol of my newfound strength and independence. I had survived Marcus's deceit, and I would thrive in spite of it. The night sky outside my window was dotted with stars, each one a reminder that even in darkness there is light. I was ready to step into that light, to embrace the possibilities of a life lived on my own terms. The day I filed for divorce was filled with a tumult of emotions. There was a sense of finality, a closing of a chapter filled with betrayal and hurt. As I left the lawyer's office, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Divorce? Really, Elena? Is this what you want?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "Yes, Marcus. This is exactly what I want. I want freedom from your lies, your gambling, and your affairs," I replied, my voice resolute. "You can't do this to me. We're married, for better or for worse." "Worse, Marcus? You've given me nothing but the worst. I've tolerated your behavior for too long, no more." He scoffed. "You think you can just walk away from this? From me? You'll be nothing without me, Elena." "I'd rather be nothing than continue being your enabler and victim. You made your choices, Marcus, and now you have to live with them." His voice turned to desperation. "Elena, please, we can go to counseling, work this out. I need you." "You needed me, Marcus. Past tense. You lost me the moment you decided to betray our vows." Hanging up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally said what needed to be said. The path to healing was long, but I had taken the first step. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork and meetings with my lawyer. The divorce proceedings were messy, with Marcus trying to cling to every asset and penny we had accumulated together. But I stood my ground, determined to get what I deserved. The day the divorce was finalized felt surreal. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of freedom enveloped me. I was no longer Elena, Marcus's wife. I was just Elena, and that was more than enough. But even with the legal ties severed, the emotional wounds remained. I threw myself into work and rebuilding my life, but the nights were the hardest. The silence of my apartment was a stark reminder of the emptiness within. One evening, as I sat alone with my thoughts, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. "Elena, it's me, Marcus. I need to talk to you." His voice was different, lacking the usual arrogance and manipulation. There was a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Why are you calling me, Marcus? We have nothing left to discuss," I said, my voice cold. I know. I wanted to apologize for everything." The words caught me off guard. In all our years together, Marcus had never truly apologized for anything. "Why now, Marcus, after everything?" "Because I've lost everything, Elena. The gambling, the affair, I've lost my job, my friends, everything. I'm alone, and it's all my fault." His words were a cold comfort. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to revel in his downfall. But another part, a part I thought I had buried, felt a pang of sadness for the man he could have been. "Marcus, I can't help you. You need to help yourself. Find a way to make amends, not with me, but with yourself." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "You're right, Elena. I'm sorry for everything." As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was the closure I needed. Marcus was facing the karma for his actions, and I was free to move on with my life. I looked around my apartment, my sanctuary, and felt a sense of peace. I had survived the storm and come out stronger. My future was mine to shape, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. Months had passed since my divorce from Marcus was finalized. The journey had been arduous, filled with battles both legal and emotional. But as I looked out the window of my new apartment, watching the city lights twinkle, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had emerged from the shadow of a broken marriage, stronger and more resilient. The sound of my phone ringing broke the tranquility of the evening. Glancing at the screen, I saw a name I hadn't expected. Thomas, my first love from years ago. "Hi, Thomas. It's been a while," I said, my voice tinged with surprise. "Elena, I heard about your divorce. I just wanted to check in on you, see how you're doing." Thomas's voice was warm, a soothing balm to my bruised heart. "I'm doing okay, Thomas. Rebuilding, you know how it is," I replied, trying to sound more upbeat than I felt. There was a hint of hesitance in his voice. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to meet for coffee? Catch up on old times?" The invitation caught me off guard. Thomas and I had ended on good terms, but life had taken us in different directions. Yet the thought of reconnecting with him brought a smile to my face. "I'd like that, Thomas. Let's meet up." The day we met for coffee felt like stepping into a time capsule. Thomas still had the same easy smile and gentle eyes that had drawn me to him all those years ago. As we talked, it was as if no time had passed, yet everything had changed. We shared stories of our lives since we had parted ways, the joys and the heartaches. When I told him about Marcus, the betrayal, and the divorce, Thomas listened with a compassionate ear. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that, Elena. You deserve so much better," he said, his hand reaching across the table to cover mine. His touch sent a wave of emotions through me, a mix of nostalgia and newfound hope. "Thank you, Thomas. It means a lot coming from you." As we parted ways, Thomas turned to me. "Elena, I don't want to overstep, but if you ever need someone to talk to, or just hang out, I'm here. You were always special to me." His words lingered in my mind long after we said goodbye. The offer of friendship, perhaps something more, was a ray of light in the darkness I had been navigating. In the weeks that followed, Thomas and I grew closer. He was a stark contrast to Marcus, his kindness and sincerity a balm to my wounded heart. Our friendship blossomed, and I found myself smiling more, the burden of the past slowly lifting. One evening, as we walked along the river, Thomas stopped and turned to me. "Elena, I know you've been through a lot, but I've always cared about you, and I always will. I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know my feelings are real." His confession took me by surprise, but it was a welcome one. "Thomas, I care about you too. I'm just scared of getting hurt again." He took my hands in his. "I understand, Elena, and I'll wait, for as long as you need. I just want you to be happy." Standing there under the starlit sky, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I could heal, where I could love again, on my own terms. The pain and betrayal of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. I was Elena, strong, resilient, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. With Thomas by my side, I stepped forward into the new chapter of my life, one filled with hope and the promise of new beginnings.